The Senate chamber was buzzing with tension. Cameras were rolling, reporters were scribbling notes, and the public gallery was packed to the brim. Justice Samuel Alito had been invited to testify before the Committee on Judicial Ethics, a hearing that promised fireworks from the very start. Across the room, Representative Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone, her eyes locked on the justice. Everyone knew she came prepared, her sharp questions and fearless demeanor already making headlines in recent weeks. Justice Alito leaned back in his chair, a smug smirk spreading across his face. "Representative Crockett," he drawled, "perhaps if you spent less time on theatrics and more on understanding the law, you'd know the questions you're asking are, how shall I put this, irrelevant." The room fell into an uneasy silence. A few gasps escaped from the audience. Crockett didn't flinch. She simply raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. Everyone knew what was coming next, her clapback. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Justice Alito, I didn't come here for your approval. I came here for the truth." Her words echoed through the chamber, her tone steady yet piercing. Reporters perked up, typing furiously. The justice smirked again, clearly underestimating her resolve. "Truth?" he chuckled. "Representative, you seem far more interested in sound bites than substance. Maybe that's why the public gallery cheers you on, you play the role of an actress, not a lawmaker." The remark was sharp, deliberately crafted to humiliate her. But Crockett's smile only widened. The air thickened. Everyone sensed she was about to strike back in a way no one expected. The justice's condescension lingered in the air, but Jasmine Crockett didn't rush. She let the silence stretch until even Alito shifted in his seat. Then she spoke with precision. "An actress? If defending democracy is a performance, then maybe the real actors are the ones wearing robes while bowing to billionaires instead of the Constitution." The audience erupted, gasps, whispers, even a few claps before the gavel slammed down. Alito's smirk faltered for the first time. He hadn't expected her to call him out so directly. Still, he tried to recover. "That's an outrageous accusation," he shot back, his voice rising slightly. "You are treading on dangerous ground, Representative." But Crockett didn't blink. Her composure was unshaken, her eyes locked on him like a hawk. "Dangerous ground," she repeated, leaning closer to her microphone. "Justice Alito, the only dangerous ground is a justice forgetting that his loyalty belongs to the people, not to political donors or private jet owners." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. Cameras zoomed in. The justice's face tightened, his earlier amusement vanishing. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. "You've clearly misunderstood the judiciary's role." Crockett tilted her head. "No, Justice. I think the American people understand it very well. What they don't understand is why someone in your position mocks accountability while pretending to be above it." The room exploded with applause before the gavel slammed again. The chairman demanded order, but the energy in the chamber was undeniable. Crockett had shifted the tone entirely. Justice Alito cleared his throat, trying to reassert control. "Representative, perhaps you should remember your place. This committee is not a courtroom, and you are not a prosecutor." Crockett shot back instantly, "And perhaps you should remember yours. This is not your courtroom, and you are not a king." The line landed like a thunderbolt. Laughter and cheers filled the air despite repeated calls for silence. Alito's jaw clenched as his carefully composed demeanor cracked. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "This kind of disrespect undermines the integrity of this institution." Crockett, unwavering, replied, "No, Justice. What undermines integrity is mocking the people who dare to question you." By now, the justice's smirk was gone. His tone grew defensive. "You're twisting words, Representative. I have served this nation for decades." Crockett clasped her hands calmly. "Service is measured not by years, but by actions. And when those actions show bias, the people deserve answers. The audience hummed with approval. Even some committee members shifted uncomfortably, realizing the justice was on the ropes. Alito tried to pivot. This is nothing but a political spectacle. Crockett countered instantly, a spectacle you created when you mocked this body. If accountability feels like theater to you, maybe that says more about your script than mine. The justice's cheeks flushed, his voice rising. This is outrageous, he barked, slamming his hand on the table. You are attacking the very foundation of the court. Crockett didn't raise her voice. Instead, she lowered it, forcing everyone to lean in. No, Justice Alito. I'm protecting it. Because if the people lose faith in the fairness of the court, then it's already crumbling from within. A standing ripple of applause broke out despite repeated warnings. Even the chairman struggled to gavel it down. The cameras caught it all, the nation watching as Crockett seized the moment. Alito, visibly rattled, tried to mask his frustration with another smirk, but it no longer looked confident, only strained. Representative, he said sharply, you presume to lecture me on fairness? I interpret the law, not public opinion. Crockett leaned forward, her words cutting. Then interpret this, the law belongs to the people, not to you. If your interpretation forgets that, then you've stopped being a justice and started being an obstacle. The audience gasped. Some members of the press nearly dropped their pens in shock. Alito opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was deafening. Crockett's words had pinned him. The chairman finally barked out, order. Order in the chamber. But the momentum had already shifted beyond his control. Crockett continued, unwavering. Justice Alito, you mocked this committee. You mocked the very idea of oversight. But the truth is, accountability is not optional, it is the price of public trust. The audience rose again, clapping and cheering despite desperate attempts to calm them. The cameras zoomed in on Alito, his face a storm of frustration. He muttered, this is a disgrace. Crockett replied instantly, the disgrace is thinking you can sneer at the people's representatives and walk away untouched. Alito's voice cracked as he tried to recover. This entire line of questioning is beneath the dignity of this institution. Crockett's eyes locked on him. Then raise the dignity, Justice. Lead by example. Because if mocking the people's voice is your idea of dignity, then the people deserve better. Thunderous applause shook the chamber. This time, the chairman's gavel was drowned out completely. The justice leaned back, defeated but unwilling to show it. His smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by a stony glare. Crockett didn't gloat. She simply sat back, her words still hanging in the air like a verdict. Justice Alito, she said, her tone sharp yet calm, you've made a career of decisions that shape lives. Today, you've learned that your words shape them too. Mockery has consequences. The crowd erupted once more, this time rising to its feet. A full standing ovation thundered through the chamber. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing this moment would dominate headlines. Alito sat frozen, glaring but silent. He had no comeback left. As the applause raged, the chairman finally gave up trying to gavel the room into silence. Instead, he looked at Crockett, a mix of frustration and reluctant respect in his eyes. Justice Alito glanced toward the cameras, realizing the optics were devastating. He had come to this hearing confident he could outwit his critics. Instead, he had been dismantled in front of the nation. Crockett folded her notes neatly, unfazed. She hadn't needed to shout. She hadn't needed theatrics. Her clapback was sharp enough to leave the justice with no defense. The chamber stood, applauding Jasmine Crockett as she calmly rose from her seat. The justice sat stone-faced, the smirk that once carried him now shattered. Crockett's final words lingered in the air, power is temporary. But integrity lasts forever. The people are watching, and they will remember who mocked them, and who defended them. The ovation roared louder, echoing beyond the walls of the chamber, carried instantly across headlines, social media, and television screens. Justice Alito had tried to mock her. Instead, Jasmine Crockett left with a standing ovation, and he left with a bruised reputation that would haunt him for years. In a packed chamber, Justice Samuel Alito leaned back in his chair, a sly smirk tugging at his lips. He had just delivered a sharp remark aimed at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, questioning her intelligence in front of the entire room. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of his expression. The audience fell into a tense silence, waiting to see how she would respond. Jasmine sat upright, her eyes steady and unshaken. She had been underestimated before, but never humiliated. With calm precision, she leaned into the microphone and said, "Justice Alito, I came here prepared for a serious discussion, not for schoolyard mockery. If your goal is to undermine me, I suggest you bring more than a smirk, because facts will outlast your sarcasm." A ripple of murmurs filled the room. Some gasped, others grinned. Alito's smirk faltered for the briefest second, but he quickly tried to recover, leaning forward as if to fire back. The cameras shifted again, the moment intensifying like a heavyweight match about to erupt. Justice Alito adjusted his robe, feigning amusement as he leaned toward the microphone. "Congresswoman, perhaps you should focus on staying in your lane rather than lecturing members of the court." His voice carried an air of superiority, meant to belittle her in front of the entire chamber. The audience stiffened. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing this was no ordinary exchange. Crockett, however, didn't flinch. She paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. Then she calmly raised a folder filled with documents. "Justice Alito, my lane is the Constitution," she said firmly, her tone sharp but controlled. "And unlike a smirk or a dismissive comment, I brought evidence. Would you like me to read aloud where your own rulings contradict your statement just last week?" The room buzzed. Alito blinked, clearly not expecting her to challenge him so directly. The smirk returned, but this time it seemed forced. Members of the audience leaned forward, sensing something historic was unfolding. Crockett slowly flipped through the folder, each page crisp under the lights. "Let's begin," she said, her voice steady but cutting. "On Monday, you stated that precedent must always guide decisions. Yet here," she held up a highlighted passage, "in your own opinion last year, you dismissed precedent entirely when it didn't align with your preferred outcome." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The cameras zoomed in on Alito's face, his jaw tightening as Crockett read his words verbatim. She continued, her confidence growing with each page. "And here's another, you spoke about the importance of impartiality. Yet just 2 weeks ago, your comments outside this chamber suggested the exact opposite, that your personal beliefs weighed heavier than the law." The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Crockett laying each page on the desk in front of her like evidence in a trial. The audience could feel the shift, this was no longer a one-sided exchange. Alito's smirk had hardened into a scowl. Then she looked directly at him and added, "You mock me, Justice Alito, but I am not here for your approval. I am here for accountability." The chamber erupted in murmurs, some even clapping before being hushed. Alito leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk as though the weight of the moment pressed against him. His voice sharpened, louder this time. "Congresswoman, you cherry-pick lines to create drama. This is not a courtroom, and you are not a judge." The words were meant to sting, but they landed flat. Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if amused by his desperation. She let the silence stretch, forcing every eye in the chamber to settle on him. Then she answered, crisp and unwavering. "You're right, Justice. This isn't a courtroom. It's far more important, it's the court of public trust. And while you may wear the robe, you don't own the truth. That belongs to the people watching today." The audience stirred, applause breaking out despite the moderator's attempts to restore order. The sound filled the chamber like a wave, rolling over Alito's attempt at authority. He blinked, visibly rattled, his smirk long gone. Crockett calmly closed her folder and folded her hands, her composure a stark contrast to his growing frustration. The cameras caught every second, and social media was already exploding with clips. The moderator's gavel struck the desk, trying to calm the swelling applause, but the energy in the room had already shifted. What began as Alito's attempt to humiliate Crockett was now unraveling in real time. Alito forced a laugh, though it echoed hollowly through the chamber. "Congresswoman, passion may win you applause, but it doesn't win arguments. The people expect seriousness, not theatrics." Crockett leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "Seriousness? Then let's talk about serious matters, like the credibility of this court. Because every time you dismiss legitimate concerns with mockery, you make the public question the very foundation you claim to protect." The words hit like a hammer. A hush spread across the chamber, heavier than before. Reporters exchanged glances, realizing they had just captured a career-defining moment. Then, as if to drive it home, Crockett added, "You can call this theatrics, Justice, but the truth has a way of speaking louder than your smirk. And tonight, the people are listening." The chamber erupted, this time uncontrollably. Applause thundered, cameras flashed, and even some officials who usually stayed silent began nodding. Alito's face darkened, his authority slipping away with each cheer. Alito straightened in his chair, his voice rising above the cheers. "Enough of this grandstanding. This chamber is not your stage, Congresswoman." His tone cracked with frustration, the weight of losing control clear in every syllable. Crockett didn't raise her voice, she didn't have to. Her calm cut sharper than his anger. "With all due respect, Justice, the stage was set the moment you mocked me. I didn't ask for this moment, but I won't shrink from it either. If defending integrity makes you uncomfortable, perhaps the discomfort says more about you than me." The audience froze, then broke into roaring applause. Some stood, clapping, while cameras panned to lawmakers whispering to one another, their eyes wide. The contrast was unmistakable, Alito's anger against Crockett's composure. Social media feeds outside the chamber exploded with clips, hashtags already trending. Commentators whispered into their microphones, "She's turning this entire hearing upside down." For the first time, Alito's gaze faltered. His hand hovered over his notes, but he didn't speak. The smirk that had started the confrontation was gone, replaced by the tight-lipped look of a man cornered. Crockett rose from her seat slowly, deliberately, her presence commanding the room. She placed both hands on the desk before her, scanning the chamber as though weighing the gravity of what she was about to say. "Justice Alito, history doesn't remember smirks or condescension. It remembers courage, truth, and those who stand for the people even when it's uncomfortable. I will not be mocked into silence, because silence is complicity, and I refuse to be complicit." The chamber erupted once more, this time louder than before. People in the audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. The sound reverberated off the walls, drowning out the gavel that pounded in vain. Alito's face flushed as cameras captured him sitting rigid, unable to respond. The powerful Justice, who moments earlier had mocked with ease, now looked diminished under the weight of Crockett's words. Crockett stood tall, letting the ovation wash through the chamber, not as a performer soaking in applause, but as a leader who had spoken truth to power and been vindicated in the eyes of those watching. Even some of Alito's allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing the tide had turned. In that moment, Crockett owned the room. As the applause thundered on, reporters rushed to capture every angle, their cameras flashing like lightning. The ovation was no longer a ripple, it was a wave sweeping through the chamber. Hashtags bearing Crockett's name blazed across social media within minutes, clips of her words spreading faster than the gavel could strike order. Justice Alito shifted uncomfortably, shuffling his papers with hands that betrayed the smallest tremor. He tried to lean into his microphone, but the roar of approval drowned out his voice. For the first time in years, his authority looked fragile, cracked by a single moment of defiance. Crockett, however, didn't gloat. She simply lifted her hand slightly, signaling for calm. The audience gradually quieted, the respect in the room undeniable. With steady composure, she said, "This is not about me. It's about accountability. It's about proving to the people that no one is above answering hard questions, not even those in the highest seats of power." The ovation reignited, even stronger. This time, nearly the entire chamber rose to their feet. The sound was deafening, an unmistakable standing ovation. Alito sat motionless, lips pressed tight, as though trapped in the very silence he once tried to impose on her. Outside the chamber, the frenzy had already exploded. Reporters crowded the steps of the building, their microphones pointed at every official leaving the hearing. Headlines were being written in real time: "Crockett dismantles Alito. Standing ovation stuns the court. Justice mocked, justice shaken." Clips of Crockett's sharp words and Alito's faltering expression dominated every major network. Commentators on live panels replayed the moment she declared, "Silence is complicity," calling it the line of the night, and perhaps of her career. Meanwhile, on social media, hashtags like #CrockettClapback and #SmirkSilence trended worldwide. Ordinary citizens posted their reactions, some writing, "I've never seen a member of Congress handle a Supreme Court justice like that before," while others called it a defining moment of courage. Inside his chambers later that evening, Alito avoided reporters, slipping out a back exit. His allies scrambled to issue statements, downplaying the exchange, but the damage was clear. For the first time in a long while, the justice had been publicly rattled, and the country had witnessed every second. Crockett, on the other hand, walked calmly through the front doors, greeted by supporters and flashing cameras. She didn't raise her voice or linger for theatrics. She simply said, "This is about accountability. Always." By the next morning, the confrontation dominated every front page and news broadcast in the nation. Commentators across the political spectrum were forced to weigh in. Some of Crockett's harshest critics admitted, grudgingly, that her composure under pressure was remarkable. Others praised her as the only voice willing to call out arrogance at the highest levels. Editorials appeared almost instantly: "Crockett reminds America of accountability. A justice mocked, a congresswoman rising." Clips of the standing ovation circulated with millions of views, replayed endlessly on morning shows and late-night programs alike. Meanwhile, legal scholars dissected Alito's dismissive tone. "It wasn't just unprofessional," one said during a primetime segment, "it was a blatant attempt to belittle an elected official. And it backfired spectacularly." In community centers, cafes, and even university classrooms, people debated what they had seen. Students quoted Crockett's words, activists held watch parties replaying the exchange, and her supporters began to describe the moment as a turning point. Even members of Congress who usually kept their distance began to signal support, sharing clips of her remarks with captions like, "Accountability matters," and, "Well said." Justice Alito, however, remained silent. The man who once mocked with ease was now avoiding cameras altogether. By midweek, Crockett's fiery stand was no longer just a viral clip, it had sparked a groundswell. Grassroots organizations seized the moment, launching petitions demanding higher standards of conduct from the court. Thousands of signatures poured in within hours, fueled by the momentum of her words. At town halls, citizens quoted her directly, "Silence is complicity." The phrase had become a rallying cry, painted on signs, printed on T-shirts, and repeated in chants outside courthouses. What began as a tense exchange in a chamber was now reshaping the national conversation about accountability and judicial power. Cable networks devoted entire panels to the confrontation. Analysts dissected the symbolism of the standing ovation, calling it a rare crack in the wall of judicial untouchability. One commentator declared, Justice Alito thought he was mocking her. Instead, he handed her the microphone to speak for millions. Inside Washington, allies of Crockett were emboldened. Colleagues who once hesitated to back her outspoken style now leaned in, recognizing the resonance she had with the public. Even those who disagreed with her politics admitted she had outshone a sitting Supreme Court justice on live television, a feat few could ever claim. Meanwhile, Alito's silence grew louder with each day. Refusing interviews, dodging reporters, his absence only made the contrast sharper. Crockett was everywhere, Alito nowhere. By the end of the week, the pressure was suffocating. Editorial boards across the country penned columns questioning whether Justice Alito's behavior had undermined the dignity of the court. One headline read, "When Mockery Backfires, the Lesson of Crockett versus Alito." In Congress, a bipartisan group quietly discussed drafting a resolution calling for higher standards of conduct for justices, citing the very incident as proof of eroding trust. Crockett's name was on everyone's lips, her face plastered on magazine covers, her words replayed in endless loops on television. Meanwhile, Alito's allies scrambled behind the scenes. Anonymous sources tried to downplay his smirk as misinterpreted, but no spin could erase the video evidence. The clip of Crockett's calm, unwavering stare while dismantling him had already become iconic. Outside the court, protesters gathered with signs reading, "Accountability now," and "Silence is complicity." The chants echoed through the streets, their voices amplified by Crockett's words. Reporters noted that never before had a congressional exchange with a justice ignited such a public firestorm. Crockett, however, didn't revel in the spotlight. When asked by reporters if she felt she had defeated Alito, she replied simply, "This was never about defeating anyone. It was about reminding America that power unchecked is power abused. I'll keep saying it until it changes." The remark only added to her stature, while Alito's silence deepened his humiliation. Months later, the moment had cemented itself as more than just a viral exchange, it had become a chapter in American political history. Documentaries replayed Crockett's defiance frame by frame, commentators calling it "the night the smirk died." Her words were etched into the cultural memory, quoted in speeches, rallies, and classrooms across the nation. For Jasmine Crockett, it was never about the applause. Each time she was asked about the ovation, she gave the same steady answer, "That applause wasn't for me, it was for accountability. It was for every person who feels dismissed by those in power." Alito, however, remained a cautionary tale. His mockery, once casual and unchecked, had become the very symbol of arrogance exposed. His name would forever be linked to the day he tried to belittle a congresswoman and instead handed her the loudest victory of her career. When Crockett walked into a crowded town hall months later, the audience once again rose before she even spoke. Their standing ovation wasn't just respect, it was recognition of a voice that had stood unshaken in the face of mockery. And in that moment, as cameras flashed and voices roared, it was clear, history had chosen its memory. Not the smirk. Not the mockery. But the woman who refused to be silenced, Jasmine Crockett. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect only grew stronger. Universities began holding forums dissecting the exchange, professors labeling it a modern case study in the balance of power. Law students cited Crockett's words in debates, calling them a reminder that respect must be earned, not demanded. Crockett's speeches drew record crowds, her message resonating far beyond politics. She became a symbol of courage in the face of condescension, proof that a steady voice could dismantle arrogance at the highest level. Everywhere she went, people rose to their feet, not just out of admiration, but out of solidarity. Justice Alito, on the other hand, never fully recovered. His silence lingered like an unanswered question, his smirk now infamous in the nation's collective memory. Every time the clip replayed, the contrast between his mockery and her unshakable resolve was clear. When history books recorded the event, it wasn't Alito's jab that was remembered. It was Crockett's calm retort, the thunderous standing ovation, and the way one moment of mockery transformed into a movement for accountability. And as Crockett stood once more before a roaring crowd, she closed with the words that had ignited it all, "Silence is complicity." The audience rose again, the ovation shaking the walls, cementing the legacy of a night when arrogance fell silent, and truth stood tall. Months later, the moment had cemented itself as more than just a viral exchange, it had become a chapter in American political history. Documentaries replayed Crockett's defiance frame by frame, commentators calling it "the night the smirk died." Her words were etched into the cultural memory, quoted in speeches, rallies, and classrooms across the nation. For Jasmine Crockett, it was never about the applause. Each time she was asked about the ovation, she gave the same steady answer: that applause wasn't for me, it was for accountability. It was for every person who feels dismissed by those in power. Alito, however, remained a cautionary tale. His mockery, once casual and unchecked, had become the very symbol of arrogance exposed. His name would forever be linked to the day he tried to belittle a congresswoman and instead handed her the loudest victory of her career. When Crockett walked into a crowded town hall months later, the audience once again rose before she even spoke. Their standing ovation wasn't just respect, it was recognition of a voice that had stood unshaken in the face of mockery. And in that moment, as cameras flashed and voices roared, it was clear, history had chosen its memory. Not the smirk. Not the mockery. But the woman who refused to be silenced, Jasmine Crockett.